My daughter-in-law stood beside my hospital bed, clutching a forged inheritance document with trembling hands. She whispered to my son that once I was gone, every dollar, every property deed, and every family investment would finally belong to them. They never noticed my eyes opening for a single silent second. They certainly never imagined that the woman they believed was dying had already arranged the most devastating trap of their lives. Before we begin, dear friends, please help me. Your subscription is very valuable to me. Please subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I was 68 years old, a retired probate attorney, and the widow of a man who had spent 43 years building a respected construction company from a rusty pickup truck and an impossible dream. Most people assumed retirement had softened me. They mistook my quiet smile for weakness. They forgot that decades inside courtrooms had taught me one lesson above all others. The loudest liar almost always defeated himself. He simply needed enough rope. My son Daniel was once the greatest pride of my life. He was thoughtful as a child, hardworking as a young man, and endlessly devoted after his father died. Everything changed when he married Vanessa. She was beautiful in a polished, expensive way. She wore perfume that smelled of jasmine layered over sandalwood and carried handbags costing more than many families earned in 2 months. She always spoke sweetly in public, but behind closed doors every compliment carried a hidden hook. At first the changes were subtle. Daniel stopped visiting alone. Financial conversations became strangely uncomfortable. Vanessa constantly asked detailed questions about my trust, my savings, and the rental properties my husband and I had accumulated over 4 decades. She laughed whenever I answered vaguely, but disappointment flashed across her face before she recovered. I noticed everything. Old habits never disappear. One Sunday she served me tea in delicate porcelain cups decorated with blue roses. While Daniel answered a phone call outside, Vanessa casually asked whether I had considered simplifying my estate by transferring everything before I became too old to manage it. Her tone sounded caring. Her eyes betrayed something colder. I smiled gently. I changed the subject. That evening I opened the fireproof safe hidden behind a bookshelf in my study. Every original deed, trust amendment, investment statement, and insurance policy remained exactly where I had left them. I spent the next 4 hours photographing every document, scanning each page into encrypted storage, and sending secure copies to my longtime attorney and closest friend, Margaret. If anyone intended to play games with my life's work, they would discover I had been preparing for far longer than they realized. The following week, Vanessa surprised me with an invitation to dinner at their house. She insisted on cooking every dish herself. Daniel sounded excited on the phone, saying she wanted us to become a closer family. I accepted immediately. Not because I believed her. Because people who are certain they are winning usually become careless. Their dining room looked as if it belonged inside a luxury magazine. Crystal glasses reflected the warm lights overhead. Imported candles released the scent of vanilla and cedar. Every plate was perfectly arranged. Vanessa smiled constantly, yet she barely touched her own food. She watched me instead. Every bite. Every sip. I noticed Daniel drinking the same sparkling water she poured for me. A tiny flicker of panic crossed her face. She quickly stood and replaced his glass, claiming the first bottle had gone flat. Daniel laughed without suspicion. I quietly memorized the brand, the bottle number, and even the cashier's sticker still attached to the bottom. Something was wrong. When I returned home that evening, I placed the untouched bottle she had insisted I take with me into a sealed evidence bag. Years as an attorney had taught me that instincts mattered, but evidence mattered more. The next morning, I delivered the bottle to a private forensic laboratory owned by a retired investigator named Charles Whitmore. We had worked together on fraud cases years earlier. He asked no unnecessary questions. 3 days later, he called. His voice was unusually serious. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "there are traces of a powerful prescription sedative inside that water. Not enough to kill someone immediately. Enough to make an elderly person appear confused, unstable, and mentally incapable. I thanked him calmly. Then I sat alone in my library. I did not cry. I did not panic. Instead, I experienced something colder than anger. Perfect clarity. Vanessa was not trying to murder me. She wanted everyone to believe dementia had stolen my mind. If a court declared me mentally incompetent, control of my estate could legally shift to someone acting in my best interests. Considering Daniel trusted his wife completely, I already knew exactly who planned to stand beside him during that process. The pieces began fitting together with terrifying precision. Her questions about my trust. The sudden interest in my medication. The repeated offers to organize my finances. The carefully staged concern whenever neighbors visited. She had been building a story. Now I intended to finish it. Margaret arrived at my house that evening carrying her leather briefcase. Together we reviewed every financial account. My investment portfolio totaled just over $9,300,000. For rental properties generated monthly income. My primary residence had recently been appraised at $2,180,000. Every account received new security measures, biometric verification, and silent fraud alerts. Without knowing it, anyone attempting unauthorized access would trigger notifications to 3 attorneys, 1 investigator, and the bank's fraud division before a single dollar moved. Then I made one more decision. One that even Margaret found shocking. I instructed my physician to cooperate with a carefully designed performance. If Vanessa wanted the world to believe I was dying, I would give her exactly the performance she expected. Over the next 6 weeks, I transformed myself into the woman Vanessa wanted everyone to see. I moved more slowly. I occasionally repeated simple questions. During family dinners, I deliberately misplaced my reading glasses even though they rested safely inside my purse. My physician documented mild memory concerns without ever making a false diagnosis. Everything remained legal. Everything remained truthful. Stress, grief, and age could easily explain occasional forgetfulness. Vanessa eagerly filled every silence with dramatic conclusions of her own. She began speaking over me whenever visitors stopped by. "Oh, she's been having difficult days," she would sigh with theatrical sadness. "Sometimes she forgets where she is. I worry she can't handle the financial responsibilities anymore." I simply smiled. Every lie she told became another brick in the wall she was building around herself. Meanwhile, Charles quietly investigated her background. The report arrived in a thick envelope. It contained far more than I expected. Before marrying Daniel, Vanessa had accumulated over $480,000 in unsecured debt. Luxury credit cards. Designer boutiques. High-interest personal loans. 2 lawsuits from former business partners. 1 confidential settlement involving forged expense reports. Nothing had resulted in criminal charges, but the pattern was impossible to ignore. She never built wealth. She attached herself to people who already had it. Even more disturbing, Charles discovered encrypted messages recovered through a lawful forensic process after one former associate voluntarily provided his old business records. Vanessa had written that older relatives were easier to manage than banks. Another message described inheritance planning as a waiting game where patience always pays. I placed every document into labeled folders. Dates. Sources. Certified copies. Nothing could be challenged later. Then came the forged paperwork. Margaret called me one afternoon. "Eleanor," she said, "someone attempted to file a power of attorney document using your name." My heartbeat remained perfectly steady. Was it accepted? No. Why not? Because your signature doesn't match the original documents we keep on file. I thanked her. After hanging up, I stared through the living room window at the rose garden my husband had planted decades earlier. Vanessa had become impatient. That was exactly what I wanted. 2 days later, Daniel invited me to lunch. He looked exhausted. Dark circles framed his eyes. He avoided looking directly at me. Halfway through the meal, He nervously mentioned that perhaps I should consider allowing him and Vanessa to help manage my investments. It would reduce your stress, Mom. His words sounded rehearsed. Not cruel. Rehearsed. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You've always been a good son. His eyes filled with guilt. For just a second, I saw the little boy who used to hold my hand crossing busy streets. Then his phone buzzed. Vanessa. He immediately stepped outside to answer. When he returned, the warmth had vanished from his face. She had reminded him of the script. I finished my coffee without another word. That evening, Charles installed discreet security cameras around my home with my full consent. Every entrance. Every hallway leading to my study. Every angle covering the fireproof safe. If someone entered my house believing I was too weak to notice, the cameras would notice everything. And they never forgot a single detail. The opportunity arrived sooner than I expected. Margaret called to say someone had contacted her office pretending to be my financial assistant. The caller requested certified copies of my latest trust amendment and asked whether any beneficiaries had recently changed. Margaret recognized the voice immediately. She had met Vanessa twice before. Instead of confronting her, Margaret politely refused, documented every detail, and forwarded the phone recording to Charles. That single mistake changed everything. Charles enhanced the recording and compared it with publicly available audio from a charity event where Vanessa had delivered a speech. The match was unmistakable. She had attempted to obtain confidential legal information by impersonating an employee. It was not enough to guarantee a conviction by itself, but it established intent. Intent, combined with forged paperwork and financial motives, created a devastating pattern. I still remained silent. 3 nights later, one of the security cameras alerted my phone at exactly 2:17 a.m. Someone had entered my house. I watched the live video without making a sound. Daniel unlocked the back door with the emergency key I had given him years earlier. Vanessa followed close behind wearing black gloves and carrying a slim leather folder. She headed directly toward my study while Daniel nervously stood in the hallway, repeatedly checking the windows. She knew exactly where the safe was hidden. She pressed her hand against the bookshelf, searching for the release panel. She found it. My heart remained perfectly calm because the safe no longer contained anything valuable. Weeks earlier, every original document had been transferred into a secure bank vault under attorney supervision. Inside the safe, I had left only photocopies, each one carrying microscopic identification marks invisible to the naked eye. Vanessa smiled. She believed she had won. She photographed every page. Then she removed several documents and replaced them with forged versions bearing fake signatures, altered beneficiary percentages, and a fraudulent amendment naming Daniel as sole trustee with immediate authority over my estate. The cameras captured every movement. Every fingerprint. Every whispered instruction. When they finally left, Charles and 2 licensed investigators entered my house less than 15 minutes later. Wearing protective gloves, they collected the forged documents exactly as they had been placed. Every item was sealed, photographed, and logged into a formal chain of custody. By sunrise, the evidence occupied 3 locked cases. Later that afternoon, Vanessa visited me carrying fresh flowers. She hugged me warmly. "I just wanted to make sure you're feeling better," she said sweetly. The perfume she wore was the same expensive jasmine and sandalwood fragrance from the day we first met. This time, it made me think only of deception. I thanked her kindly. Then I invited her to return the following Saturday. "I have an important family announcement," I told her. She smiled with undisguised excitement. She assumed I was finally surrendering control. She never realized she had accepted an invitation to witness the complete destruction of every lie she had carefully built. On Saturday morning, every chair in my living room was occupied. Daniel and Vanessa arrived first, dressed as though they were attending an important business meeting. Margaret sat beside the fireplace with her briefcase. Charles stood quietly near the window. My physician arrived exactly on time. 2 officers from the county fraud division waited outside until I invited them in. Vanessa looked confused. She expected a family gathering. Instead, she found witnesses. I began speaking slowly. I have spent months thinking about my future, I said. Age forces every person to prepare for the unexpected. Vanessa reached for Daniel's hand. Her smile grew wider. I've decided to discuss my estate today. The room became perfectly silent. Margaret opened her briefcase and placed several sealed envelopes on the table. Charles connected a laptop to the television mounted on the wall. My physician quietly handed me a folder containing every medical record from the previous 6 months. Then I looked directly at Vanessa. You once told everyone I was losing my memory, I said calmly. Would you like to explain why? She laughed nervously. I was only worried about your health. I appreciate your concern, I replied. Perhaps you can also explain the forged power of attorney request. Her face froze. Daniel turned toward her. What is she talking about? Before Vanessa could answer, Charles played the recorded phone call. Her voice filled the room. Every word was unmistakable. The request for confidential documents. The false claim that she worked for my office. The deliberate attempt to obtain information she had no legal right to access. Daniel stared at his wife in disbelief. Vanessa immediately denied everything. That recording is fake. Charles calmly produced the forensic authentication report. Then the television displayed footage from my security cameras. Everyone watched in complete silence as Daniel unlocked my back door. Vanessa walked straight to the hidden safe. She removed documents. She inserted forged replacements. She photographed every page. Every second appeared in crystal clear resolution. Daniel covered his mouth. He looked physically sick. I didn't know, he whispered. Vanessa tried grabbing the remote. One of the investigators stepped forward and stopped her. Margaret placed the forged documents beside the originals recovered from the bank vault. The differences were obvious. Fake signatures. Altered beneficiary clauses. Fraudulent trustee appointments. Every page had been examined by certified handwriting experts. I slowly stood. There is one final truth, I said. My illness was never terminal. My memory never disappeared. The only performance in this house was yours. The officers entered the room. Vanessa backed toward the door. There was nowhere left to run. She looked desperately at Daniel, expecting him to defend her. Instead, he slowly stepped away. His wedding ring slipped from his trembling fingers onto the hardwood floor with a sharp metallic sound. Nobody moved to pick it up. The silence inside that room felt heavier than any prison sentence ever could. Every lie had finally reached its inevitable end. The lead investigator calmly informed Vanessa that she was being detained pending formal charges related to attempted fraud, forgery, identity deception, and unlawful interference with estate documents. She immediately protested. She claimed the papers had been planted. She accused Charles, Margaret, and even me of conspiring against her. Every desperate sentence only pushed her deeper into the trap because every accusation was answered with another piece of documented evidence. The officers escorted her toward the front door. She suddenly turned and screamed at Daniel. Say something. Tell them this was your idea too. The room froze. Daniel looked at her with empty eyes. Then he quietly answered. No. I trusted you. Those 4 words carried more pain than any shout ever could. Vanessa realized she had lost the only person still willing to believe her. As the front door closed behind the officers, complete silence settled over the house. Daniel remained standing in the middle of the living room. His shoulders shook. I failed you, Mom, he whispered. I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. You failed to ask questions, I replied softly. There is a difference. He lowered his head. I ignored every warning because I loved her. I know. Love can blind intelligent people more effectively than greed ever could. Over the following weeks, investigators uncovered even more evidence. Search warrants executed at Vanessa's home office revealed hidden financial records, counterfeit legal templates, encrypted spreadsheets listing wealthy relatives of previous partners, and detailed notes describing inheritance timelines. Authorities also discovered unauthorized copies of my bank statements and photographs of confidential family documents taken months before anyone knew they had been accessed. The evidence became overwhelming. Several financial institutions launched their own internal investigations after discovering suspicious inquiries connected to accounts that had never authorized contact from Vanessa. Former business associates came forward voluntarily. One admitted she had convinced him to falsify expense reports years earlier. Another produced emails discussing ways to pressure elderly relatives into signing documents they did not fully understand. The pattern stretched back nearly a decade. She had not chosen my family by accident. She had studied us. Meanwhile, Daniel cooperated fully with investigators. He surrendered his phone, computer, email records, and banking information without hesitation. Every forensic examination supported what I had quietly suspected from the beginning. He had been manipulated, pressured, and repeatedly lied to, but investigators found no evidence that he knowingly participated in the forged documents or planned the fraud. His greatest mistake had been blind trust. That mistake nearly cost him everything. When the prosecutor reviewed the complete case file, she looked across the conference table and said something I will never forget. "Mrs. Brooks, criminals usually expect victims to panic. You prepared." I smiled politely. Years inside courtrooms had taught me that patience wins cases long before judges enter the courtroom. The trial began 8 months later. Reporters filled nearly every seat inside the courtroom because the case had attracted enormous public attention. Prosecutors presented a timeline so detailed that every lie Vanessa had told collapsed under its own weight. Bank records, security footage, forensic handwriting analysis, digital metadata, phone recordings, laboratory reports, and sworn testimony all fit together like pieces of a single puzzle. Nothing depended upon assumptions. Everything depended upon facts. Vanessa entered the courtroom wearing an expensive navy suit, hoping to project confidence. The judge seemed completely unimpressed. He had spent decades listening to polished excuses. He cared only about evidence. Margaret testified first. Charles followed. My physician explained every medical record, making it absolutely clear that I had never been declared mentally incompetent and had never authorized anyone to act on my behalf. Finally, I took the witness stand. Vanessa's attorney attempted to portray me as a lonely elderly widow who had misunderstood innocent events. I answered every question calmly. When he suggested the security footage could have been misinterpreted, I quietly reminded him that his own client had admitted entering my house without permission during her deposition. The courtroom became silent. He never returned to that argument. Then prosecutors introduced the microscopic identification marks hidden inside the photocopied documents left in my safe. A forensic examiner demonstrated how every forged page matched the exact copies I had intentionally placed there weeks before the break-in. It proved beyond any reasonable doubt that Vanessa had substituted fraudulent documents while believing they were genuine originals. Her expression finally changed. For the first time, fear replaced arrogance. During cross-examination, prosecutors displayed the encrypted spreadsheet recovered from her computer. Beside my name appeared a handwritten note. Estimated estate value, $9.3 million. Gain control through competency hearing. She insisted someone else had written it. Digital forensic experts immediately confirmed the file had been created, edited, and password protected using her personal laptop and fingerprint login. The defense had nowhere left to hide. After 12 days of testimony, closing arguments concluded. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours. When they returned, nobody needed to hear the verdict to understand what had happened. Every juror looked directly at Vanessa. The foreperson stood. Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom. Vanessa lowered her head. She did not cry. She did not apologize. She simply realized that every calculated move she had made against my family had led her to this exact chair, this exact courtroom, and this exact moment. Justice had arrived without anger. Only certainty. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month and revoked her bond immediately. As deputies escorted her away, she looked back one final time. Nobody followed her. Nobody defended her. Nobody even spoke. Her greatest punishment had already begun. She had finally become exactly what she spent years pretending everyone else was. Completely alone 1 month later, the courtroom filled once again for sentencing. Vanessa looked very different from the woman who had once walked through luxury boutiques without checking price tags. The confidence had disappeared. The perfect hairstyle was gone. Even her voice sounded smaller. The judge reviewed every victim impact statement before announcing his decision. He explained that crimes involving calculated deception against elderly family members damaged trust far beyond financial loss. He described the planning, the forged documents, the attempted manipulation of medical records, and the repeated abuse of personal relationships. Then he imposed a lengthy prison sentence, ordered substantial financial restitution, and permanently prohibited her from serving in any fiduciary role involving another person's assets. She finally spoke. "I'm sorry." The apology sounded rehearsed. Nobody answered. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded us with microphones and cameras. They wanted dramatic reactions. They wanted anger. They wanted revenge. Instead, I simply said that truth does not need to shout because evidence speaks loudly enough. Then I thanked the investigators, the prosecutors, and every professional who had refused to ignore the facts. After that, I walked away without looking back. Daniel remained beside me. The months following the trial were difficult for him. He attended counseling every week. He accepted responsibility for ignoring warning signs and for allowing fear, guilt, and manipulation to replace independent judgment. Trust, once broken, cannot be repaired overnight. Still, genuine accountability begins with honesty, and honesty was finally replacing denial. Together we reorganized the family company. Independent auditors reviewed every account. Outside directors joined the board. Dual authorization became mandatory for every major financial transaction. No single person, including me, could ever again control important decisions without transparent oversight. The experience changed how we viewed wealth. Money had never been the true prize. Integrity was. The following spring, I sold 2 rental properties and established a scholarship in my late husband's name for students pursuing careers in construction management and engineering. Watching young people receive opportunities that my husband had once dreamed about brought me more peace than another investment account ever could. I also planted new roses beside the old garden he had created years earlier. Every morning I carried a cup of tea onto the porch and watched the flowers bloom. The house no longer felt haunted by betrayal. It felt like home again. Sometimes painful chapters become necessary because they reveal who deserves a place in the next chapter of your life. I lost my illusion that family alone guarantees loyalty. But I gained something far more valuable. Wisdom without bitterness. Strength without hatred. And peace that no amount of money could ever purchase. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Let me know in the comments what you would have done. Life settled into a rhythm I had almost forgotten existed. There were no secret phone calls. No whispered conversations behind closed doors. No anxious nights wondering who might be planning the next betrayal. My mornings began with quiet walks through the neighborhood, where familiar faces greeted me with genuine smiles instead of forced sympathy. Friends who had quietly distanced themselves during the investigation slowly returned, admitting they had never known whom to believe while the accusations and rumors were spreading. I understood. Doubt can confuse even good people. Daniel continued rebuilding his life one careful step at a time. He sold the luxury sports car Vanessa had insisted they purchase and used the proceeds to establish an emergency fund for the company employees. He personally apologized to several longtime staff members whose concerns he had ignored. Some forgave him immediately. Others needed time. He accepted every reaction without complaint because he finally understood that trust is earned through consistent actions, not emotional promises. One afternoon, Margaret visited with a small envelope. Inside was the final accounting from the restitution process. Although much of Vanessa's money had already disappeared through reckless spending and unpaid debts, several remaining assets had been recovered and legally distributed according to the court's order. The amount would never erase the emotional damage, but that had never been my goal. Justice had already been served. The financial recovery simply closed the final legal chapter. Before leaving, Margaret smiled and asked whether I regretted pretending to be weaker than I truly was. I thought carefully before answering. No, I said. People reveal their real character when they believe no one is watching. She nodded because she knew exactly what I meant. Months later, I received a handwritten letter from an elderly woman living in another state. She had followed the news coverage of my case and recognized similar warning signs inside her own family. Because she trusted her instincts instead of dismissing them, investigators uncovered another inheritance fraud before any documents could be signed. Reading her words reminded me that courage can spread quietly from one stranger to another. That evening, I stood beside my husband's photograph in the living room. I kept our promise, I whispered. His picture, frozen in the gentle smile I remembered so well, seemed to fill the room with familiar comfort. For the first time in years, I felt completely free. Not because I had defeated someone. Not because I had protected my fortune. But because fear no longer controlled my future. Truth had survived. Justice had prevailed. And the life my husband and I spent decades building would continue to help honest people for generations to come. Years passed quietly. The scholarship expanded beyond our expectations. Each spring, dozens of students visited the company headquarters to share their dreams. Watching their determination reminded me that honest ambition will always outlast dishonest greed. I eventually wrote down every lesson from the ordeal. Not for publication. Not for attention. Simply for my grandchildren, so they would understand that kindness should never require blindness. Trust people, but verify important decisions. Protect your work. Keep clear records. Never sign documents you have not fully read. Those simple habits had saved my family, my husband's legacy, and my own peace. Daniel never remarried quickly. Instead, he focused on becoming the father, son, employer, and neighbor he wanted to be. Healing did not erase regret, but it transformed regret into responsibility. Every anniversary of the trial, we shared dinner together, remembered the difficult road behind us, and quietly celebrated another year lived without fear. Sometimes viewers ask whether revenge truly brings happiness. My answer has never changed. Blind revenge consumes the person seeking it. Patient justice protects innocent people and exposes guilty ones. I never wanted Vanessa to suffer simply because she had hurt me. I wanted the truth to stand where lies had once stood. The courtroom accomplished that. The evidence accomplished that. The law accomplished that. When I lock my front door each night, I no longer wonder who might betray me tomorrow. Instead, I feel grateful for the friends who remained loyal, the professionals who honored their responsibilities, and the quiet strength that carried me through the darkest season of my life. Every sunrise reminds me that storms eventually pass, but character remains. Before anyone leaves this story, remember that evil rarely announces itself with a villain's speech. It usually arrives wearing kindness, offering help, asking harmless questions, and waiting patiently for someone to lower their guard. Real courage is staying compassionate while refusing to surrender common sense. Keep copies of important records. Ask difficult questions. Seek independent advice before making irreversible decisions. Honest relatives will never fear transparency. Honest professionals welcome verification. Honest friendships survive uncomfortable conversations. Deceivers, however, depend upon silence, confusion, urgency, and unquestioning obedience. Once those tools disappear, their confidence disappears with them. That is why preparation defeated manipulation in my life. Every receipt, every photograph, every recorded conversation, every witness, and every carefully preserved document became another shield protecting the future my husband and I built together. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was forgotten. In the end, truth needed only time and courage to be heard. May your own future always reward both qualities. If my story leaves you with one lesson, let it be this. Never underestimate a calm mind, a prepared heart, and the power of documented truth. Lies may travel quickly, but facts always arrive with greater force in the end. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Let me know in the comments what you would have done.